One.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ivan Rodrigues, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to the Economic Times roundtable discussion titled Roadmap for Voluntary Carbon Markets, powered by Bayer. Post the Paris Agreement, many companies are pledging towards climate change by reducing their own greenhouse gas emissions. Yet, many businesses are finding out that they cannot fully eliminate their emissions or even lessen them as quickly as they might like to. For the companies committing to achieve net zero emissions, which means removing as much greenhouse gas from the air as they put into it, use of carbon credits will be very important to offset emissions they can't get rid of by other means. India can acquire a major share of this opportunity and attract significant investment in voluntary carbon credit generation projects if the policy framework conducive operative environment can be created. Private investment flows in the carbon credit generation projects can not only help the country improve the local environment, but also put substantial money in the hands of Indian farmers as the carbon capture opportunities in Indian agriculture are humongous. Agriculture plays a vital role in India's economy, and about 49% of the working population depends on agriculture as their principal means of livelihood. Agriculture, along with fisheries and forestry, is a large contributor to India's GDP. With agriculture being a major contributor to the GDP as well as GHG emissions, this indicates that India might claim emission reductions or removals created in an agriculture project for accounting under its NDC target. The demand for carbon credits could increase by a factor of 15 or more by 2030, and by a factor of up to 100 by 2050. Overall, the market for carbon credits could be worth upwards of $50 billion in 2030, as estimated by a recent report published by McKinsey & Company. This roundtable features a panel of renowned business leaders across different sectors where they will explore the strategies and plans prepared for strengthening public-private partnership, address double counting issues, discover pathways for net zero carbon emission, and use of carbon credits for agricultural development. It is our belief that the words of wisdom from the respected members of this roundtable will help many peers to rethink and rework their strategy going forward. And based on the discussions and inputs from the panel, Bayer will release a white paper in a couple of days. With that, it's an honor and privilege to welcome Shri R.P. Gupta, IAS Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Government of India, for the keynote address. Mr. Gupta, over to you.
Thank you very much, Miraj. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm given to understand there are people from abroad also. So very good afternoon and good morning to you all. It's a great privilege to be invited to this very important event. Let me begin by thanking the Economic Times Group for organizing the event on Roadmap for Voluntary Carbon Market. The Paris Agreement, adopted in December 2015, seeks to create a global framework to tackle the climate change issue. Under the agreement, all the parties to the UNFCCC acknowledge the need to contribute to achieving ambitious and collective goals to fight climate change. Article 6 of the Paris Agreement allows for voluntary enhanced ambition through cooperative market and non-market applications. Use of internationally transferred mitigation outcomes towards nationally determined contribution to deliver an overall reduction in global emissions. Recognizing the need to mitigate the effect of climate change, India has made an impressive progress by strengthening the existing initiatives and bringing in new energy reforms. In addition to this, the government has also laid down ambitious targets in our NDC under the Paris Agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, India's private sector has been very proactive in terms of engaging with the climate change debate, actions, and putting out climate mitigation commitments. Several of the Indian companies have already announced ambitious mitigation commitments. There is therefore an opportunity to work with Indian companies and associations to further enhance their participation for meeting future climate goals. Carbon markets potentially can pursue such an agenda very cost effectively. While carbon credits have been in use for decades, the voluntary market for carbon credit has grown significantly in recent years only. McKinsey, as has been told, they estimated that in 2020, buyers retired carbon credit for about 95 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. A recent report published by them only that estimates that overall the market for carbon credit could be worth upward $50 billion by 2030. India really played an important role in international carbon markets under the Kyoto Protocol. The CDM mechanism created enough experience in India to suggest that regulation can support redirecting significant market investment towards low carbon investment, develop market institutions, and can play a very vital role in helping the GHG objectives. The National Clean Development Mechanism Authority in our ministry accorded host country approval to about 3,060 projects. These projects have the potential to generate roughly about 780 million certified emission reductions, reducing about same equivalent tons of carbon, CO2. Until 12 October of this year, 1686 projects have been registered in CDM, and they are from India. CDM registered projects till September 2021 have issued 263 million CERs. India has contributed about 12.4% of the total issued CERs. The high-level activity executed by the Indian industry and private sector has positioned this country as a whole world's second largest supplier of the CERs and the number of registered projects under UNFCCC. The negotiations on modalities of operationalizing Article 6 of Paris Agreement on market mechanism is yet to be concluded. This is an important agenda for negotiation in COP26 in November at Glasgow. We expect to reach consensus in the UNFCCC, and India is ready to engage very constructively in the discussions on carbon market mechanisms. India, with its huge experience and notable beneficiary in Kyoto Protocol, has an important stake in emerging market architecture. From its end, different stakeholders, including policymakers, private sector, and civil society alike, in anticipation of revenue generation and investment, have demonstrated keen interest in developing the market. There are, however, several unanswered questions and challenges that need to be addressed. The first is with regards to the transition of CDM projects into the new market regime, which is to come into operation after 2020. CDM has been successful in India in terms of rallying positive action and innovation from industry towards greenhouse gas mitigation. The existing pipeline of CDM projects can potentially be used effectively for scaling up mitigation action under market approaches of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. An important challenge is distinction of relevant carbon projects which successfully run the test of environmental integrity to ensure a smooth transition into Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. At the domestic level, Bureau of Energy Efficiency has been made the nodal agency for developing the carbon market and the mechanism, and it is responding by nudging several policy-backed market initiatives to ensure and enable energy efficiency. Towards reduction in emission intensity, India has been undertaking various mitigation activities such as standard and labeling program for appliances, household, business, PACT scheme for energy intensive sectors, energy conservation building codes for buildings, fuel efficiency norms for transport, and GSM activity related to municipalities, agriculture, and urban local bodies. Most of these initiatives are in the arena of energy efficiency, but indirectly they have a very great impact on the emissions also. Going forward, we should leverage carbon market to achieve our carbon objectives. Perhaps there is need to plan the requirement for a domestic carbon market, and we would be doing it. This carbon market for developing countries particularly play a very important role, but it is also a double-edged sword. If the pressure on developing countries to enhance their NDCs and also go for net zero, it means the scope for the carbon reduction and the carbon market transfer in the carbon market also get reduced to that extent. So we have to be very careful, and our NDCs should reflect the reality and also the net zero. But this can be a mechanism for achieving the net zero, as well as this also gives us an opportunity to get the finance, but also then it enhances our target, because our carbon markets, carbon credit which are generated in the country, they would be transferred to somebody else, and that it will make achieving the net zero that much difficult. However, all these policy issues, they are under discussion, and we hope to come up with a mechanism to incentivize the efficient use and market for the carbon. And I hope the policy paper which is presented, this will help us in this endeavor. I again congratulate the Economic Times for organizing this event. I hope the deliberation of the conference will be very fruitful and add to our efforts of India in global climate action. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sri R.P. Gupta, for taking time off from your busy schedule and joining us at this roundtable discussion titled Roadmap for Voluntary Carbon Markets. Thank you for outlining the initiatives on carbon markets by the Government of India. We wish you and your department and the Government of India the very best going forward. With that, we move on to the special address by Simon, Chief Operating Officer at BEAR South Asia. Simon, the virtual floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Honorable Sri R.P. Gupta. Thank you, Economic Times. Thank you, Ivan, but also to my co-panelists. It is an honor to represent Bayer at this panel. And let me start with a couple of, let's say, broader statements, right? We all see carbon dioxides and greenhouse gas emissions being actively discussed literally everywhere. What is interesting is that in the last couple of, I would say, probably it's just 1 or 2 years, we've really been seeing people making concrete commitments. I would have had a slide, but really for Bayer, India is absolutely essential to meeting our global commitments in terms of advancing a carbon zero future of agriculture, the production of higher yielding crops with fewer natural resources, and all this we need to do by empowering smallholders, because in the end, when you look at where the changes need to be made, it actually is in smallholder farming in India. Now, we're all aware that the US has basically, with the Biden administration, rejoined the Paris Accord, and also R.P. Gupta was referring to the COP26, which is happening this month. And I'm convinced that we're going to be seeing companies and countries actually increasingly advancing their dates and commitments as this conference moves forward in Glasgow. Some of you will even have seen that a country like China just last month reduced production actively to meet their carbon emission targets for the year. And that's a very, very strong statement when you think about it. What we need to understand is that this will impact and is already actually impacting global supply chains and global trade. Carbon dioxide is not something that if you don't have it in one part of the world and produce it in another part of the world, it is for you non-impactful, if you like. So where in the past we've seen often, let's say arbitration, may I call it, happening, in the future, you're going to be seeing that supply chains will backward integrate completely and say, what was actually the carbon footprint of my raw materials, if you like. And this basically is what opens up the opportunity for carbon trade as we see it today, at least in an interim period, until everybody has figured out how they can make themselves. And let's not underestimate this. Basically, each emitter today, while looking at how can I in the interim compensate via potentially carbon credits, actually is also looking at how can I be real carbon zero or even negative. If my information is correct, actually Tesla, car maker, just yesterday in their quarterly results announced that they made $280 million just in the quarter in terms of carbon trading certificates because of their offset opportunities. So you can see the value of the market, while predicted at 50 billion by McKinsey by 2030, might actually be growing even quicker when you look at just that one company. Now, if we go to the next slide, when we look at India, just being very precise, we produce rice on 44 million hectares. And for 1 kilo of rice, we need about 4,000 liters of water alone, not taking all the other greenhouse gas emissions which come with methane, et cetera, from rice production. And therefore, when you just look at rice, it is a significant emitter of greenhouse gases. And there is ways and means, if you could do me a favor and just switch the slide, please, where in terms of water use efficiencies as alternative wetting and drying and direct seeding, an integrated crop wheat management, reduction of tillage, you can literally start seeing opportunities for producing carbon credits. And when you integrate it into value chains, we see opportunities also for realizing better prices for what we would, for example, call low carbon rice in an international trading scheme. All this obviously needs to be backed by data collection, because proving that you've actually avoided carbon is going to be the essence of being able to trade it. With this, Ivan, I would like to hand back to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Simon, for your special address. It was short, concise, and I think it sets a wonderful backdrop for the roundtable discussion to follow. So, ladies and gentlemen, with that, we move on to the roundtable discussion titled Roadmap for Voluntary Carbon Markets. And it's an honor and privilege to first welcome the members of this roundtable. Dr. Shailaja Vaidya Gupta, Senior Advisor, Ministry of Science and Technology, Government of India. Dr. Usha Zair, Executive Director at Grow Indigo. Dr. Bjorn Ole Sander, Senior Climate Change Scientist at IRRI. Simon, Chief Operating Officer at Bayer South Asia. Joe Phelan, Director at WBCSD India, and Dr. S. Bhaskar, Assistant Director General, Natural Resources Management Division at ICAR. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This roundtable panel will be moderated by Dr. Anshuman, Associate Director, Water Resources Division, TERI. Dr. Anshuman, over to you.
Thank you, Evan, and thank you to Economic Times for this opportunity.
As you've already introduced, we have eminent sort of speakers to reflect on the subject. But let me just share with you a few thoughts that I have, and maybe our panelists can really reflect on that. As we have already known and discussed, that the world and the countries are really looking towards limiting the atmospheric warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade and achieving net zero emission by 2050. And in doing so, a lot of transition would be required across, and some of which has been reflected by Dr. Gupta, Mr. Gupta, and as well as Simon. Now we know that agriculture is the largest emitter, and for various reasons, in different countries, it has a fair share of greenhouse gases emission. As far as India is concerned, our agricultural emissions, what is known is that is largely contributed from livestock, from nitrogenous fertilizers, rice cultivation, and so on and so forth. Now, while it is sort of a challenge from the perspective of agricultural emission, but also this is a part of the solution. And we know that from the global croplands and grasslands, almost around 8.6 gigatons of carbon dioxide a year can be captured and stored, as per IPCC 2019 report. Now, what is important is that we need to have a carbon policy, which is must in agriculture to reduce emission, and also incentivize farmers through carbon credits and possibly giving them opportunities for global trading. And the role of corporate and industries is very important in this. Now, there's various solutions, with some of which actually Simon has well mentioned, from direct seeding of rice to alternate wetting drying, zero or low tillage, changing cropping patterns, and so on and so forth. But there are challenges, as far as smallholding farmers are concerned. We know that there's a very high cost of measuring and verifying the soil carbon credits, and the complexity of basically claiming the credits as well. And we also need a market where there is a liquidity. Although the potential is there, and as has been highlighted, there's a fair bit of global worth of markets for carbon credit across. And there are some good examples as well, on some of the companies who have come forward. Microsoft is one example. Again, Simon mentioned about Tesla and others. So given such kind of, a platform where we already are looking forward towards, reducing the carbon emissions, and also looking into that pathway of creating that voluntary carbon markets, it will be really good to, see what our perspectives from across the world is. And in particular, what our speakers have to share with. May I invite at first Dr. S. Bhaskar to share his perspective and interventions on what ICR proposes for building a robust carbon market in agriculture, and how do you think the government of India's stance on promotion of carbon markets can be linked to it. So over to you, Dr. Bhaskar. We'll have a 5 minutes initial interventions, and then maybe when time permits, we can come back to second round of thoughts.
Thank
Over
you.
to you, Dr. Bhaskar.
Thank you, Dr. Anshuman, for introducing me and giving me an opportunity to say a few things about the ICR initiatives. If you see the agriculture sector in India, it has emitted about 408 million tons during 2016, which registers a 2.25% compared to 2014. Of course, this is a very relatively small portion of overall carbon dioxide equivalent when you compare it with the other economic sectors like transport, energy, and other things. Even then, the government of India is giving a lot of importance how to reduce the GHG emissions in the Indian agriculture sector. The major sources you already pointed out that carbon, methane, and nitrous oxide. And methane is mainly from the rice fields as well as from the livestock, whereas N2O is from the fertilizer management, fertilizer usage in the agriculture sector. Of course, we have committed during Paris Agreement, where we have to reduce by 30 to 33%. Considering all these things, of course, Indian government of India has launched a flagship project that is called National Innovations in Climate Resilient Agriculture in 2011 itself. And so far, we have come out with several climate resilient agriculture that helps in reducing emissions from agriculture sector. There are some of the agronomic techniques, which can even mitigate the GHG emissions also. And these technologies includes a system of rice intensification, SRI, DSR cultivation, and slow release fertilizers. Particularly, the government of India has come out with the neem coated fertilizer itself to reduce the mitigations to a large extent. and manure management and soil health card based fertilizer recommendations. Also, it is in vogue. We have launched a soil health mission, and it has run very nicely. And we have also given about 10 crore soil health cards to the farmers in across the country. And other over and all, we are also into a development of integrated farming systems. And so far, we have come out with 60 AFS models, and many of them are either carbon neutral or carbon negative, to tell you. So these things are being demonstrated across the country through our network projects, and it is being promoted by NABARD also in their FPO and FPCC, and their outreach programs are going on very well. Even through farmer participatory approach also, we are with the farmers, we are working, and we are saturating these technologies in the farmers field. Other part of it, in NICRA itself, we have created 446 NICRA villages, and we want to make these NICRA villages as a climate resilient villages. And we are after establishing these NICRA villages after 5 years, we are also assessing the impact, and it is giving good results so far. So agriculture can also capture and store emissions in so many ways, crops and pastures, as well as the agroforestry tree species also. So it can sequester large amount of carbon dioxide, both in the perennial tree component as well as in the soil. Therefore, so we are promoting agroforestry models also across the country, and we are also converting cow dung or some of the waste, agriculture waste, into valuable manures, or using it for the biogas production. Through that also, the carbon GHG emissions can be brought down. But the problem is that although we have built up so much of carbon stocks and carbon credits but many of these practices involve some kind of incentivization is required. Otherwise, there is a loss of yield penalty for the farmers. So unless you incentivize the farmers, it's very difficult to saturate these technologies, particularly among the small farm holder section. Of course, we are also getting into that kind of cluster mode approach, particularly mission and organic value chain, particularly in Northeast region, or in some of the other niche areas where organic farming can be developed. So our government of India has fixed a target that by 2025, we should at least bring 5% of our cultivated area under organic farming. Presently, it is about 1.5%. Even then, we are number 2% across the globe. So if you see, the 1.5% itself is a large area for a country like India. So that's why we are promoting all this climate smart technologies and all those things. But the lack of standard procedure for voluntary carbon marketing in agriculture, the credits could not be captured by the farming community. And there should be a robust mechanism. I hope Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change is a nodal ministry from the India side. It can negotiate very well with the international bodies, and so that it can argue on part of the farmers, so that we can also see that our farmers get benefit out of these voluntary carbon markets. However, very recent examples of a pilot project in Gujarat started during 2017, covering about 5 districts, and where it sequestered around 85 lakh trees covers, and in 11,000 hectares. And of course, this is being implemented by Terry and the VNV visited. And this kind of success stories are also there. So we should upscale this kind of success stories to other areas to benefit from the carbon the sequestration and carbon markets, and selling of these carbon credits to the corporate structure, corporate sectors who cannot have that kind of mechanism with them. That is one more thing. And such kind of initiative in community approach on a landscape basis at that village level or watershed basis model, and building robust carbon market in Indian agriculture should encourage the farmers for wider adoption of at least climate resilient agriculture. It will help win-win situation. It will be win-win situation for the farming community as well as for the corporate sector. This is what I would like to share in this roundtable conference. Thank you for giving me an opportunity, because I have to attend one more meeting urgently. So the guests are waiting in another virtual meeting. Thank you very much. If you don't mind, I will leave quickly.
No, thank you so much for your intervention. And I think you have highlighted a few important points. We will continue, and thanks for joining. I just noted there were 2 important things that you brought in, amongst, of course, others as well. One was, of course, incentivizing the farmers which is very important actually if you really need to look into how it is, how the entire carbon market can be upscaled. And second was to set the standards. I think there are two important things that I think will be something that we should look forward to. Maybe I'll now call upon Dr. Bjorn Sanders to basically reflect upon his experience in ERI, International Rice Research Institute, on the options and feasibilities of the GHG mitigation in rice, and also given the current policy situation, how do you think these carbon credit systems can work, and what are the real challenges in that sense that you have experienced? If you can share your thoughts, Dr. Sanders, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I leave now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the organizers for this important roundtable, and thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts. First of all, I would like to highlight one point that many of our participants may not be aware, and this is the very high emissions coming from rice. Rice is the highest emitting of all staple crops, and that is due to methane emissions that's being produced in paddy soils. Globally, we're talking about 1.3% of all anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, which seems to be relatively small. But if we look into rice producing countries, the shares are of course much higher. So Vietnam, for example, has 15% of their national emissions come from rice. And in India, it's about 5% of total greenhouse gas emissions of the country that come from rice production, which also means that there is a high reduction potential. And to put that into perspective, if we convert 1 hectare of rice from a traditional practice into low emission practices, we can save as much as converting 1 average US household to renewable energy. These numbers are of course very variable. So I based it on rather Southeast Asian average emissions, and these emissions are different, generally a little bit lower in South Asia. They are generally higher in lowland delta areas. They are a bit lower in upland areas. They are generally higher in double rice systems as compared to rice wheat or rice maize. So there is a lot of variability. And Dr. Bhaskar mentioned already some of the reduction options. It's basically 2 main features we can turn on. That's water management, and that's straw or residue management. For water management, AWD, alternate wetting and drying, has been mentioned. It means basically introducing a number of dry down periods during the growth duration. And also direct seeded rice was mentioned. For residue management, one has to know if you include a lot of straw into flooded fields, that increases the emission strongly. Now, feasible options strongly depend on the agroecological context. So for example, you cannot dry down a field in the rainy season. If it rains too much, you will never get a dry field. You need, if you want to convince a farmer to dry down to a certain level, the farmer needs to be sure to get water when he or she needs it. So a decent irrigation infrastructure needs to be in place. And then it depends a bit on how water is being paid for. And a volumetric payment scheme is a strong enabler of water-saving technologies. For straw, for example, straw balers are strong enablers, as they enable straw to be transported and traded, and only then that can be a feasible option for farmers to apply changes. And we have done kind of these large-scale suitability assessments, looking at large data sets, for example, for the Central Plains of Thailand or the whole Mekong Delta. I want to give you one example. We found that if in all suitable areas in the Mekong Delta, this alternate wetting and drying could be applied, 5 million tons of CO2 equivalents could be saved every year. So we're talking about very high quantities. Now, how can that be translated into carbon credits? the CDM methodology, CDM process was mentioned before. And we have indeed developed a methodology to account for carbon credits under a CDM process for rice production many years ago. Now, while the CDM process has never really taken off for agriculture, particularly definitely not for rice, the private certifying bodies such as BCS or Gold Standard and others, they have adopted the methodology. So the methodology, although the process is not valid, the methodology can be used. And that is a methodology particularly for alternate wetting and drying, or also for the method called mid-season drainage, where you only apply one drainage in the middle, which also has a high mitigation potential. For other mitigation options, we would need to develop new methodologies, and that is ongoing. There is usually a very strict review process involved because verifying bodies want to make sure that the methodology is sound. The problem, of course, is that especially in Asia, we look at smallholder production systems. So we have many farmers that apply not necessarily the same management practices. So we're talking about very high transaction costs for the verified. And here the question is, what level of verification is necessary, and how large can you make these projections? And then also for verification of that, it's of course a very tedious process. And then the question is, can we maybe link that to already ongoing monitorings of production systems? So link maybe carbon credits to production standards, where assurance frameworks may exist already. And there is, for rice, one example, the Sustainable Rice Platform has produced a standard for sustainable rice production, and that includes greenhouse gas mitigation options such as alternate wetting and drying. And if farmers want to be certified, there is an assurance framework already to see have they met the requirements. So is it possible to link a carbon credit scheme to these ongoing verification mechanisms? And then, of course, we have another problem with transaction costs in terms of payments. We have many farmers, which does not necessarily make it very profitable to get a few carbon credits. But is it possible maybe to pay these, to do the payments on a higher level, on a cooperative level, for example, that can then use the money for canal irrigation infrastructure maintenance, so that it comes back to the farmers in one way or the other. I mentioned the baseline determination because of a very heterogeneous field that we're talking of, and a big limitation is limited experiences so far. So we don't have much data. We don't know how, for example, how large an area needs to be for a project to be profitable. And that's why we really need some brave and first mover companies that just try out these carbon credit schemes in rice production. I stop here for now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your intervention. I think again you raised the point about looking into the nitty-gritties of high cost of verification. How can that be addressed? And of course about the mechanism itself in the agriculture sector. I will quickly, just about, I'm conscious about the time, maybe I'll switch to our next speaker. Thank you for your intervention, Dr. Sanders. Dr. Usha Zahad, if I may just request you to come in and share your experiences. I am aware about a lot of good work and examples that you have been leading at Grow India. If you could just share your experiences, and also if you can reflect upon the issue of double counting in carbon policy developments. Please, Dr. Usha Zahad.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Anshuman, and my apologies if there is background noise. I'm on the road, but I hope it goes smoothly. I will focus my remarks around two streams. One is on the smallholder farmer and the possibilities for the smallholder farmers to generate additional income, and all in the context, of course, of a carbon marketplace. So agriculture, as has been already shared, contributes to greenhouse gases, maybe not as much as some other sectors, but significant enough that I feel that we need to look at agriculture as a solution in our greenhouse gas mitigation story rather than as a problem. The smallholder farmers, other than the forestry sector, have never participated in a carbon marketplace opportunity. And while conservation agriculture has been, of course, promoted for a significant number of years, I would say, ERI had a big program, CIMMYT has a big program, but the adoption at scale is still lagging. And one of the key reasons for that, in my mind, is around incentives, because the burden has been put on the farmer that you do this practice because it's good for all of us. But in the process, you don't really get anything out of it other than going about. Yes, of course, there is benefit in terms of long-term sustainability for the farm as well, but the farmer does not have that luxury of looking 10 years down the road and saying, yes, my farm has done better. So what is it that we can do in terms of incentivization to these smallholder farmers? Smallholder farmers for all these years have been supplying food to us. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to think about them participating in a voluntary carbon marketplace where they now have additional revenue stream in addition to their farming while adopting regenerative agriculture practice. So it's a win-win situation for everyone. So Grow Indigo is a new company and we are focused on doing agriculture differently, which is sustainable. To this effect, we are focused on 3 areas. The first one is around biological solutions, which again focuses on sustainability. We have some digital platforms we offer for input and output marketplaces, which again looking at creating efficiencies in the value chain, agri-value chain. And lastly, around carbon marketplace, which is what I will talk a little bit more about in the coming couple of minutes. So the carbon marketplace idea around voluntary carbon marketplace, especially for smallholder farmers, and I won't repeat the numbers which Bjorn has shared already. Dr. Bhaskar had also talked about agricultural emissions. But the approach that Grow Indigo is taking is how do we create a global voluntary carbon marketplace which is scalable? How do you look at innovation? Not innovation only from practice change, but also technology innovation, which would allow us to actually monitor the practice change on millions of farmers without actually having to visit every single farm, for instance, as an example. And how do you get these practices adopted at scale and a carbon credit coming out of it by a practice change which is of high quality, verified by a third-party agency, so that that carbon credit can be easily traded at a higher value. So we don't want to see carbon credit coming out from the smallholder farmer agriculture being traded at $5, for instance, for a ton of CO2, or CO2 equivalent. But how do you get that price to be significantly higher so that the farmer actually realizes the income from it? Now, creating a parallel income source shifts the burden from the farmer and provides the necessary incentives for farmers to go forward with regenerative agricultural practices. Now, smallholder farmers, as I mentioned, have never participated, and India's nationally determined commitments do not include smallholder agriculture farmers. There is some mention, but it actually, it does not specifically include the emissions coming out from the smallholder farmer agriculture, and thus the opportunity. So if we can generate additional income for the farmer while not taking away from the NDCs which India has, then it's a win-win situation again for the smallholder farmers and for the voluntary carbon market, private voluntary carbon market proponents. The key factors, though, that I'll talk about for a couple of minutes, which are essential for the voluntary carbon market to work, is a clarity at national level for the voluntary carbon market to attract investors and buyers of the carbon credits which are going to be generated from the smallholder farming system. As farmers enroll in various projects, the government must clarify that these carbon credits that are generated with the practice adoption change or additional practice adoption will not be counted by the government towards their NDCs. Right. So these, if they're counted against the NDCs, then there is no carbon market, because what would you trade? It's already accounted for, taken care of. But the farmer in the process has not received any money unless the government wishes to purchase those credits at a market price, which would be a tremendous actually signal that we value the carbon credits being generated by the smallholder farmers, and the government is willing to set a high benchmark in terms of pricing for such credits which are coming. So the point is that the government must have clear guidance in terms of policy, in terms of regulation, which says that the government would not double count, because then the carbon market would not work. And if this clarity is not there, then of course the investors will not come forward to purchase such credits, because then there is again a doubt as to what will be the scenario after you have started the project. Now, generating the carbon credit, the project creation, technology development at scale, monitoring and verification all require significant resource, as well as it's a long-term commitment, right? So long-term commitment from a project developer, but also almost a perpetual payment to the farmer for carbon credits which are created, because typically we are looking at a minimum of 20 years of payment which will go to the farmer if the farmer continues to follow that additional practice change. So the policy becomes critical for the project proponents to come forward so that the voluntary carbon markets will work in the Indian situation. If we look at our smallholder farmers and the significant role they can play in the greenhouse mitigation story that India is working on, I think we really need to have this policy document in place sooner rather than later, so we can really bring the benefits of it to the smallholder farmer. Thank you so much, Dr. Anshuman, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Vishwazayar. And I think again, critical points that you made, and I think that's something that probably should be a way forward to work towards as well, especially on the policy front, and looking into how we can address the double counting, issue. I'll shift to now and invite Mr. Joe Phelan, Director WBCSD India, to share his perspectives on nature-based solutions for climate change mitigation, and also as in Asian investor perspectives, what are the kind of global discussions on in this particular perspective of net zero emission economy. Joe Phelan, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Anshuman, and thank you to the Economic Times and Bayer. And it's an honor to be on a panel with my colleagues for this hour. Let me begin by saying, so I'm Joe Phelan, and I lead the work of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development in India. You may notice that I'm bouncing around, and that is because I was in Uttarakhand for the weekend and for Eid, and I was affected there by the floods which have locked down parts of the state, and I'm just returning now. I'm still on the road. So my apologies for appearing in this circumstance dressed like this, and there may be some noise, but as happens regularly to those of us who live here in India, the urgency of climate action is always brought home, and we understand well that extreme weather events like sudden downpours can be a result of climate change, and we also know that deforestation is definitely a driver of the kinds of floods and landslides that have afflicted parts of Uttarakhand over the last few days. with loss of life, tragically. We know that very, very well, and we've known that actually for too long, really. But what is different about this moment is that there now definitely is a market to pay for nature-based solutions, natural solutions that can help to mitigate climate change, and also definitely have a lot of co-benefits, both in terms of the kind of climate resilience that the doctor from the ministry was talking about recently, but also in terms of incomes and livelihoods that we've heard the two other speakers mention from IRI and from Indigo. So there's a market now, and there's an opportunity for India to capture a lot of the value that there is globally, if we can act. So natural climate solutions have the potential to cost effectively mitigate 37% of the required emissions to meet a pathway consistent with the Paris Agreement. And cost effective is between $10 to $100 per ton of CO2. Today, only $170 million has been, well, in fact, 2019, $170 million was invested in natural climate solutions. Whereas by 2030, the annual investment required will be to capture 10 gigatons of CO2 in NCS potential, and 10,000 million tons at between $10 and $100 per ton is an enormous amount of money. And it's really important that here in India, we put in place the systems, the markets, and the verification to capture a lot of that value to change farming and agriculture and make India more climate resilient. India has been identified as one among the 4 major countries that collectively hold 53%, more than half, of all the pan-tropical potential for cost-effective natural climate solutions. What's unusual about India compared to those other 3 is that whilst they're rich in forests, the biggest potential is practices. And these are fits and are intrinsic to the economy. We've heard already how 49% of the population are working directly in agriculture. As frameworks are developed, and from an international off-taker perspective, and again, it's early days, the WBCSD, the World Business Council, my organization, member company Microsoft, published a paper recently on their experience of seeking to invest in natural climate solutions and projects. And it's very important to bear in mind the lessons from their experience. So off-takers will evaluate and will differentiate between avoided emissions and removed emissions. And so any system we develop needs to reflect that. They definitely, as we've heard already, look at short removals, short-term, medium-term, and long-term removals, and those get evaluated in their investment decisions, as do the risks of leakages. And ultimately, natural climate solutions will be assessed by investors against technology-based removals into the geosphere. Those are very nascent, but investments will flow there too. And I've mentioned the social and the ecological co-benefits of natural climate solutions in India. And increasingly, those will be tested, valued, but also used as a means to rule out investments. And so it's very important that whatever system we have here in India captures the social and ecological co-benefits of natural climate solutions. Let me finish by talking about an initiative that the World Business Council for Sustainable Development has joined as one of 50 international organizations. It's called the NCS Alliance, the Natural Climate Solutions Alliance. And it's 50 organizations who are working together to remove the barriers to unlocking natural climate solutions at scale. And it's a campaign built around five principles. And the first is about raising ambition and stimulating action and investment. And together, we're working to secure aggregate commitments to invest in 1 gigaton of CO2 removals and reductions by 2025. So in just over 3 years' time, creating demand for 1 gigatons. And if you think that's 1 gigatons at a minimum of $10 per ton of CO2. The second is about strengthening trust and credibility. A lot of these messages are aligned with what we've heard from the other panelists. And so ensuring that those investments in credits are to the NCS Alliance guardrails on high quality demand and supply. And we've developed criteria for companies on the demand side to evaluate their investments, as well as principles for those on the supply side to ensure credibility. The third piece is about generating the quality supply of NCS credits, facilitating access to finance. The third is demonstrating action and increased ambition through a tracking framework to report and communicate increased corporate natural climate solution investment. And lastly, it's about scaling NCS by mainstreaming it through both voluntary and compliance carbon markets. And it's excellent that this roundtable today to have policymakers present, in India wanting to understand how to establish compliance markets or integrate natural climate solutions into existing markets. 2 final points. The criteria that we've developed for buyers on the demand side are developed from the CORSIA emissions unit eligibility and the ICROA Code of Best Practice Guidance, and they mirror the core carbon principles of the TVS-VCM, which is the task force for voluntary carbon markets. And that's a very important initiative in this space. And the principles for issuers of carbon credits, we view the San Jose principles for high ambition and integrity in international carbon markets as really the key tenets for developing carbon markets, and we would encourage those developing carbon markets here in India to follow those principles. So I will end there.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. I think you have shared a lot of informative thoughts on it. I would have loved to look deep into that, but let me save the time and invite our next speaker, Dr. Shailja Gupta. She's Senior Advisor, Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India. Dr. Shailja, you've heard about the challenges, about the perspective on the possibilities of the theme. What do you think the science policy advices could be to contribute towards this particular effort of GHG emission? Also, if you could share in the Glasgow COP, what do you think would be the highlight of our presence? Dr. Shailja, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anshuman, and good evening to everyone. Good morning, maybe. Everybody has talked about the responsibilities and what Indian farming system can do to mitigate the climate change, and what it is that Indian farmers can do to adapt to cut down the emissions. What we haven't really spoken about, and this is one outcome I would expect from COP26, is the responsibility of the global north. Nobody talks about the responsibilities of the countries of the global north. These are the countries who use the maximum resources of the planet, whether it is the use of tissue paper or a high-end tech product. The consumption of the global north is not talked about. Even in agriculture, the post-consumer waste of the developed world is humongous, and that needs to stop. The wastage of post-consumer agriculture produce needs to stop in the global north. Every wastage is an input and an output of emission. Every resource of the planet is being used for whatever is being wasted. And I think the consumption and waste in the global north needs to reduce. And that is something they have to take responsibility for. It is all very well to tell the Indian farmers, the small Indian farmers with an average farm holding of about 1 hectare to adapt to better practices, and then at the same time tells them that we have a voluntary carbon markets, which maybe you will not be able to access, or you will not, it will not be profitable to a company which is emitting maybe thrice as much carbon emissions as the farmer, the small holding farmer is emitting. I think the whole system is very, very unfair, and the balance of the responsibilities of the global north needs to be got into on a board and on the table. It can be just not we can talk about the shared principles, defining and verifying the carbon credits and what is available and what is not available. Can an average farmer, a small poor average farmer access it? I doubt it very much. You need cooperatives for that. And we are going round and round in circles. Can the global north provide farmers with cheaper, more scalable, more affordable, easily adaptable technologies? Can that be part of your what do you say, voluntary carbon markets? Can we think a little bit out of the box and look at a sustainable solution which is available and accessible in an equal and equitable way to every person on this planet? It cannot be a diktat of the global north that this is what we have, this is how you need to do it, and this is how you should do it. I think the consumer or the average person who is aspirational, who is looking at a better quality of life, who's looking at owning 2 cars, to say it's the aspirational class. And we cannot stop the aspiration just because now we realize that the planet is at risk. If we realize the planet is at risk, then it is a global risk. It is not confined to one country, one area. It is a global risk. We see forest fires across the globe, the US, Europe, Australia, you name it, we have forest fires. It is because of a practice of growing monocrop forests. The biodiversity of forests have been lost in these areas, and we see the forest fires across the globe. Are they not contributing to the emissions? Yes, they are. What is the global north doing about it? Well, are they equalizing it or neutralizing it by way of putting more funds into the carbon credit market? Are they being more responsible? I don't see much commitment from them. Where is their commitment into putting in more resources, more commitment in terms of funds, technology, and accessibility of technology? The resources are across the planet, whether it is the cocoa in the African country, the oil in the South America or the Middle East. All of these are resources which are being used by everyone, and mostly from the global north. How are we getting to a more responsible and equitable globe, so to speak? If it is a global responsibility, then can the globe come together and put in more resources on the table? Can it? Why does it need to go on as business as usual? Why are we not talking of out of the box solutions? Why is the aspirations of developing the world being put at stake? Why would we not want to live the same quality of life the global north leads? We can be consumptive, we can be wasteful, we can be using all the resources of the planet, but we need to have a more, and I'm sorry I have to bring this on the table, but I think we need a more fair discussion across the table. And if this happens in this COP26, where there is more commitment from the global north, I think that will be the most, or even the acknowledgement, yes, we have to be more forthcoming in our commitments. I think that will be a great success of the COP26. Everything else which has been said, I agree to that. How can we voluntary carbon markets which can be accessed by farmers? How does a farmer who's barely has access to technology manage to access carbon credits? It's a challenge, and I don't know what are the solutions. There are more wiser people and more experienced people are on the table who will be able to provide these solutions. But I think the nuances of the social needs and the aspirations of a developing world needs to be understood by the developed world. And only then we can come to and meet together and find a solution to a global problem, which is the climate change. Otherwise, it is just rhetoric and lecturing at the best. I'm sorry, I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gupta. Actually, I do pick up, key points, and of course, this entire debate of, or let's say, the rationale of, having equitable resource consumption, and also more importantly, as you highlighted, resource consumption and reduction in resource consumption and the wastage as well must be looked into, and of course, that's the way forward in any case, whether you are developed or you are developing. But yes, that kind of equity has to be looked into, as it cannot be ignored for sure. I also take up from.
Sorry to interrupt you, but to say, and we have huge amount of agriculture waste in India. 30% of agriculture waste is wasted. Agriculture produce is wasted, and that is because of lack of post-harvest storage systems. And again, here is a problem statement. Can we have affordable, accessible storage systems which an average farmer can use? These waste in the global north of agriculture produce is post-consumer, and that can be stopped very easily. It is just a social practice which needs to be brought into place. It's technology versus social practice which needs to be highlighted.
Sure. No, in fact, my next point, which I captured from your speech, is also about this cheap, affordable, technology for the poor farmers. Which also, if can be brought to the entire ambit of solutions, would be really a good way forward as well, and possible sustainability of the intervention as well. Dr. Shalya Gupta, thank you very much for your intervention, and I really appreciate the viewpoint that you brought in. It's really difficult to summarize everything, and also given the time, but I do pick up a few important points that we need to factor in the perspective of incentivizing the small holding farmers. We need a fair system which is transparent and also very much easy and robust to look into the certification process, which is easier to gauge the perspective of carbon markets and carbon credits. There needs to be clarity on policy about it as well, and of course those examples which are there on ground, they need to be shared wider to see how we can further this entire ambition of our overall GHG reduction and as well as voluntary carbon market. Just now, I don't know how much time do we have, but if we do have a couple of minutes, maybe I can take up a few questions. One question that is come to maybe to Simon is about what Bayer plans to reduce the carbon footprint in business from manufacturing to travel, with rise in portfolio, Paddy field account for around 20% of the human-related emission of methane gas, potent greenhouse gas. So the question is, to you, what does Bayer plan to reduce the carbon footprint in the businesses that it has?
Yeah, I think I also wrote into the answer. I mean, there's some very, very concrete ones where basically we say scope 1 carbon emissions we want to reduce by 42% by 2029, and I mean, I think what's important, and I fundamentally agree with what Dr. Schuyler was saying, we need to see what is possible where. Still, the topic is a global one, and you see developed markets now taking very fast steps and setting standards where we need to, in a country like India, ensure that we have our opportunities right in front of us and really use them, right? And I think to one point, I think Usha, you were mentioning it, the opportunities that we get with new technology, be it satellite imagery, be it digital, be it drones, might allow us in India to actually leapfrog and to do both, to be able to keep small land holdings. While I personally think collectivization via FPOs is absolutely essential and there's no way around it, yeah, we will not be seeing the large field monocultures that we see in some of the Western countries or also Southern countries. By the way, not Western countries, which are the highest emitters in agriculture, right? So to my mind, it is an opportunity that we need to use, and this is why the discussion is so important, because we cannot afford as a world that every Indian emits the same CO2 which currently every American does, just to be very precise about that. Yeah. But do we want every Indian to have the opportunity for the same life standard? Yes, and that's what we would need to work towards. That's what we need to work towards. And that is where I believe, and I'm confident in this, we're going to be seeing a lot of commitments coming out of COP26, which will go over and above what we see today, and they will clearly be biased towards unnecessary consumption, which comes via carbon pricing.
Thank you, Simon. I think it's a fair point. I don't know. Possibly we have overshot the allocated time, so I may not have a second round of intervention, which I would have loved to have. But as I said, we have come across some really key points, which has been made, and I think I'm sure this will be recorded and this will lead to a paper or note of the sort that can be shared into a wider group. Maybe at this point I'll check with Ivan if you would want to take over and look into closing the session.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll thank you all our panelists as well for their interventions and excellent viewpoints that was brought in. Thank you. Ivan, over to you.
Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this roundtable discussion. It was really great to listen to and learn from these bright minds and influential leaders who shared relevant insights on the roadmap for voluntary carbon markets. I'm sure we are leaving with quite a few actionable and implementable takeaways. And obviously, in about 45 minutes or 50 minutes, it's not easy to find solutions. But like Simon said, it's very important to have that discussion. And hopefully that is what has happened. And based on the discussion and inputs from the panel, Bayer will release a white paper in a couple of days, and we look forward to that white paper that will be released by Bayer. And yeah, the road is long, but at least we can decide and come together, like Dr. Schuyler just said, and all the panelists, that it's not just a country problem or a regional problem. It is a global issue rather, and we need to look at it holistically. So there we are. Last but not least, I would like to thank Dr. Anshuman for doing a fantastic job of moderating this roundtable. And let us now view a short corporate video by Bayer to conclude this webinar.
Thank you. Pleasure.
What's common between yesterday, today, and tomorrow? A single thread that binds biryani, bisi bele bhat, chakra pongal, and pulao. Something common between self-care and healthy aging. A name that's common between Sandeep, who gave up the comfort of the city for the farmland, and Mansi, who left her village for better opportunities in the city. Bayer. It's a name that has touched the life of Kalyani, Mukesh, Namrata, Rahil, Sakshi, Sanya, and millions of others like them. For over 125 years, we have been there for a happy harvest and a sumptuous feast. We have been there for innovative health treatments and self-care solutions for a healthier future. For over 125 years, we have been there for informed choices among the farmers on the fields and families across India. As we look ahead, we will continue to relentlessly work towards our vision. A goal that can only be made possible with the support of the people who make us Bayer. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow, we will always be there for you. Because it's not about what we do, it's about how we make your life better. Bayer. Science for a better life.
Well, on that note, I'd once again like to thank all the people who joined us today, especially you as members of the audience. Thank you for your questions. I'm sure they'll be addressed. We have Simon here from Bayer, and he's made a note of everything. And I'm sure these questions also, the probable answers that they will elicit, will find their way into the white paper. Once again, thank you for joining us. Have a good evening. Stay safe. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.